I'm joined today by Marc Bozeman, an attorney with the Bozeman Law Firm based out of Houston, Texas. And Marc, my first question for you is, have you ever had any personal experience with either unconstitutional nonviolent police harassment or unconstitutional non-lethal police brutality?
I have not been brutalized, thankfully. I've been intimidated, or I've had police try to intimidate me. Um, but they haven't physically harmed me. But as far as the answer to your first question about the unconstitutional police harassment, I have stories for days. Obviously, I don't have time to tell them all to you in this interview, but I have a number of them. I will just point out the one I think is most significant, and they're kind of a tie. So let me see which one would be the best one. Okay, so we were my best friend and I. He went to Episcopal High School as well. We were graduated. We had graduated from college, but it was fairly recent. And we were driving through Bel Air, Texas to pick up his stepmother. And I was sitting in the back seat because she was going to sit in the front seat. So we're driving through Bel Air, and Bel Air, Texas has a horrible reputation for stopping any and everybody if you don't have white skin. And so we get pulled over, and the officer is talking to us very belligerently, all kinds of crazy. He's like, "What are you doing here? Why are you driving through Bel Air? Why are you sitting in the back seat? It looks suspicious." And he had called for, meanwhile, little do we know, he had called for backup. And so the backup comes, and I see an officer walk up to the other side of the car, opposite to where the first officer was. And he had his hand on his gun. And all he didn't say a word. He just watched me through the back window, and he had his hand on his gun. And so when I saw, he didn't say anything to me, but when I saw him put his hand on his gun, I immediately knew to freeze, and I did not make a sound. I can't remember all what the first officer said in terms of his questions. I just know he was very belligerent. He was very rude. He didn't believe that we had a right to be in Bel Air. We told him that we were going to pick up his stepmother because we had just finished working out at Episcopal High School, which is in Bel Air. I don't think he believed us. So ultimately, he makes my friend get out of the vehicle, and they take him back to his squad car, I guess, to run a check on his plates, or his license, I mean. And meanwhile, I'm just sitting there frozen in place because the cop is still on the right side of the car with his hand on his gun, watching me like a hawk. And then they did put my friend in handcuffs. I can't remember if they put him in the back of the squad car or not, but they did place him in handcuffs. And then finally, they let him go. He came back to the car. Obviously, there was no crimes or anything on his license. And then the cop then said, "You guys fit the description of a burglary in the area." And he kind of said it half-assed. He didn't apologize. He didn't show remorse. And I remember that day we were on our way, and I remember that was one of the angriest times I have ever been. And I get angry all the time. I, in my mind, wished that officer that he would die a horrible death. That's how angry I was, because he put our lives in danger. He made this big stink about us. It's like we were freed slaves, and we didn't know that freed slaves are not to drive through Bel Air unless we want trouble. That's how it was. And so I was upset. The other time, another story, let me see. So I was leaving a club one night.
Hold on just one second, Mark. Just for the people watching, try to understand that Marc Bozeman went to an elite private school in Bel Air.
Right.
And had just graduated from the University of Michigan, one of the best universities in the world. And so it's way too often white people imagine that, well, if he'd been better educated or more clean cut or didn't have
right, I got you. And that's a great issue you raised. Let me speak on that. Obviously, it shouldn't matter how a black person looks. It shouldn't matter how a black person talks. But that is the thing. It doesn't matter. I sound white. I've always sounded white. That's just, I grew up in a predominantly white neighborhood in Fonder Southwest. My grandmother, late grandmother, and my mother were English teachers. When I was a little baby and started speaking, they corrected my English back then. And then criticized me over the way if I didn't enunciate the words properly. And so that's just how I grew up. And, I used to be very self-conscious being around other black kids when I was younger because I sounded so peculiar to them. And, you get used to it, but I was self-conscious of that for a long time. So yeah, and then my best friend, he's a medical doctor. He's a psychiatrist. He hadn't gone to medical school at that point, but he had graduated undergrad, college, and so and Francis sounds as white as I do, and we still got stopped, and we still got treated like we were. Not that if you sound a certain way, you merit better treatment, but to the naysayers, it's that doesn't matter how you conduct yourself or how you talk. And for example, since we touched upon it a little bit in the intro, I've had security called on me in my own office building multiple times. And I'm a lawyer in the building. And I'm not one to hurt for confidence. I'm the smartest lawyer in this building, probably the smartest person in the city of Houston, Texas, at least lawyer-wise. The point being, why am I getting security called on me in my own office building? And thankfully, I was on good terms with the building manager at that time because it was a period. It didn't happen anymore, but it happened during those times. And I had already been a tenant for like 2 years. So, I mean, I wasn't brand new. And they called, like if I don't know why they called security on me. Normally when I take my breaks, I go downstairs and I walk outside and I stand outside for a little bit and I walk back into my office. And I got security called on me. And I had to threaten to sue. I don't know if my lawsuit threats made it stop because I didn't threaten the people who were reporting me. I just threatened building management. So maybe they got more reports and just didn't tell me because they knew I would raise hell and sue everybody. I don't know. But yeah, that was an issue. And so yeah, there's a and oh, and I can't forget this because this is probably the most infuriating thing of it all. So black lawyers make up about 4.4% of the Texas bar, and that's roughly the same percentage of the national bar. And so there's not many of us. Okay. But any law school worth a damn has a decent amount of diversity. And so if you unless you went to law school when everything was segregated, you ought to know, okay, well, there were some black people in law school, so surely they could pass the bar and become lawyers too. Well, I remember on one case, I was representing myself or a client for an eviction. I can't remember. I may have been there for both my client and me. It was in small claims court. I hate small claims court, but I think I was there because I was there for my own traffic tickets. But I decided to wear a suit, and I was no, that's right. I was representing an eviction client, and I walked in. I was running about 5 minutes late because I had a hard time getting into my office building because the doors did not open up. And so normally in whether it be municipal court or small claims court, they call row to make sure that all of the defendants or their legal counsel are there. And the judge hadn't walked into the courtroom at that time. So I was about 5 minutes late. I missed the roll call. So I'm a lawyer. As a lawyer, that courtroom belongs to us too. We're officers of the court. And so we can do whatever we want. The only thing we cannot do is approach the bench while the judge is on the bench. We have to ask for permission first. But the judge wasn't even in the room. So I approached the front to let the clerk know that I'm here. Do not mark me absent. I'm here representing my client. As I approached the front, now I'm wearing a black suit, yellow tie, black leather briefcase, white shirt, the lawyer uniform. As I'm walking to the front of the court, the bailiff was this big white guy, and then I think it was Hispanic, the clerk. They start yelling at me to sit down and don't approach the front. And I said, I'm a lawyer. This is my courtroom. And I flashed my bar card, and I was like, I got to let the clerk know that I'm here. And so they yelled out, sit down, because they didn't believe I was a lawyer. They kicked me out the courtroom. So I'm kicked out the courtroom. I'm already plotting how I'm going to sue the state of Texas for a constitutional discrimination violation. And so then the bailiff comes out, lets me in. Well, this white lawyer, he comes in. They don't ask him anything. He then approaches the front and then sits in the jury box, of all places. They didn't say a word to him. So when I was leaving after the day was done, I was walking outside, and I turned to the bailiff and I motioned him to follow me outside because I wanted to tell him something. So he came outside. I said, that white lawyer that came in right after me, why didn't you guys yell at him or say anything to him? Oh, well, he did what he was told or whatever. He made up some crazy excuse. I'm like, that didn't even make any sense. And so at that moment, I vowed to never go to small claims court again. But yeah, I can be here all day. I haven't been kicked out of a big boy and big girls court, but I have had a judge and then also a clerk in another court. They believed I was a plaintiff representing myself pro se. Didn't believe I was a lawyer. So,
Yeah, I hear so many stories, similar stories of, whether it's the cops pull you over in your own neighborhood because
yes.
your own neighborhood may be a majority white neighborhood, and it's like they can't wrap their brain around well, surely you don't live here or you couldn't afford to live here, and just
Right.
all of these underlying racist assumptions. A friend of mine's an assistant coach at Rice University, and they stay at nice places when they go to recruits, and he'll often hear at a 4 or 5 star hotel, are you sure you're at the right hotel?
Right.
Or another black friend of mine was meeting one of his friends at a country club, and a white woman tried to hand him her car keys to valet park.
Wow.
Just like the automatic assumption of
right.
And
right.
So yeah, I mean, even outside of just law enforcement, it is a much broader issue. So my next question is, of your closest circle, and I'm really glad that you pointed out that it's not you answered the question I asked earlier exactly correctly. One, no matter how educated you are, no matter how you dress, no matter what kind of car you drive, no matter your profession, no matter your voice inflection or hairstyle, you're still extremely likely to have the police abuse your constitutional rights.
Yeah,
based on
right.
And two, and I'm so glad you mentioned this, because it's really important to understand, it doesn't matter how you dress.
Right.
Or where you went to school, or if you went to school.
Right.
You still have constitutional rights as an American citizen, including the First Amendment, association and expression, the Fourth Amendment, privacy, and so it's important for white folks to understand that even the black people who don't meet some sort of unreasonable fantasy land standard, that if they would just do this, then the cops wouldn't bother them. Even the people who don't meet the fantasy land standard still have constitutional rights. And two, no matter what fantasy land standard you apply to, it doesn't matter.
Right.
But your skin is still black. And the police and many other white Americans have over the years treated you like garbage for no reason other than your skin being black. And so my follow-up question is, of your closest circle of black friends and family members, roughly what % of them have also experienced, at a minimum, unconstitutional, nonviolent police harassment?
I would say all of them. The only one that I'm not 100% sure of is my uncle, and that's because he's never told me about that. But see, my uncle was a civil rights activist along with my mother, and they both went to UT, and so I'm sure, because he's very militant, and my mother used to be too. Of course, motherhood. I didn't think my mother had it in her, but she did. But my uncle is still kind of like that. So I assume he has, but I don't know for sure. But everybody else, definitely, I know for sure.
So it's either 100% or it's all but one.
Right, exactly.
And so given these numbers, and again, I'm calling this the Not Isolated Project, because what I hear continuously when an unarmed black person gets murdered by the police is, well, this is a tragedy, but these things don't really happen anymore, and it's an isolated incident, and it's not the 1950s. And part of the reason why we do this is, one, it's callousness and indifference and racism. Two is ignorance. And because we tend to think if it didn't happen to us, it didn't happen to you. Right. Really elite level of ignorance. To believe that because I haven't had this experience, therefore you haven't.
No, right, exactly.
And then, but then it's also ignorant based on the failure to connect the culture, right? The culture that permits the unconstitutional, nonviolent, systemic harassment of black people is the same culture that permits the nonviolent police brutality and the murders.
Yes.
And that once you connect the culture and you look at these things through the same lens as they properly should be, now you start to think to yourself, if you're an empathetic, open-minded, decently intelligent person, when you start looking at the big picture, you say, well, is it isolated or not? And so I'm curious, I know the answer, but do you consider these connected problems to be isolated?
Of course not. And I personally think it is completely illogical for someone to base the bigger picture on their very limited anecdotal experiences, particularly if they are a member of a race or ethnicity that does not routinely experience police brutality or harassment. It's absurd. Like, if it is isolated, then how in the hell can you explain how every single male member of my family practically has experienced this kind of harassment? And like we touched upon earlier, it's not just with the police. This entire country is infected. Like my brother, when he did his doctoral internship in Lubbock, Texas, he was walking my year-old nephew in or I guess he was a few months old, in a baby carriage in his own neighborhood. One of his white neighbors called the cops on him and said he was casing the houses, looking for a house to rob, and said that the carriage was just for show and that it was empty. And yet my nephew was in there. Now, thankfully, this cop was reasonable and fair-minded, and he actually chewed out the white neighbor. But the crazy thing is, the white neighbor just became more indignant and more defiant. And when my brother came back along that same route to go back to his house, the white neighbor confronted him because I guess he was embarrassed because he got chewed out by the cop. So when you see all these instances of, in every single aspect of American society, and it happens over, and you go to any black person, talk to any black person, and their stories may be different, but they will have stories for days. I defy anyone to have met a black person that does not have stories for days. And, it's just so commonplace. And you learn this as a little boy or little girl. My mom impressed upon me the importance of behaving a certain way when I was stopped by the cops. I looking upon my past when I was younger, all the times I was followed around in a store and watched like a hawk because they thought I was going to steal something, that kind of thing. It just on and on and on and on. And then part of the reason why I'm so outspoken now is because I get tired of people trying to explain away these instances of race. And that's part of the reason why I became a lawyer that practices civil rights. I would do a lot of things, but civil rights and employment discrimination, that's one of the practice areas that I have. And
Yep.
I have firsthand experience with that.
Yeah, no, it's and I think the reason why, so my generation of white people and younger, we were taught by American society to be racist.
Mm-hmm.
And we were taught that racism is wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the first generation where that's been the case. So we're getting mixed messages.
Yes.
And so because we believe racism is wrong now, even though we still practice it, but because we believe it's wrong, well, we don't want to admit the pervasiveness of it because that's a very uncomfortable mirror to hold up in front of ourselves.
Right.
Like if it's still fucked up today, that can only be because we're participating in it.
Right.
But we don't believe racism is right.
Yes.
So there's a level of confusion that, and when I talk to white people, the first thing I'll say when an interpersonal discussion, sometimes I fly off the handle online and just insult people, and that doesn't, I feel like my calling is to persuade white people to be a little bit less racist than they would be otherwise.
Yes.
If I can make white people a little bit less racist, they're going to raise kids a little bit less racistly than their parents did. and it's kind of a long ascension
Right.
up Justice.
Right.
Um,
Right.
and but when I'm in the mood to reason rather than berate, which is most of the time, because again, I feel that's my. I know when I flip off the handle and fly off the handle and say, well, that's because you're a fucking racist piece of shit. Well, I know that I did not move the needle in a good way with that. And so,
Yeah, I got you.
So I try to police my own tone. And the first thing
Right.
I'll say is, I'll say, hey, before I say what I'm about to say, understand this. I consider myself to be a racist. And I'm working.
Yes.
I consider
Yes.
myself to be a racist. And you
Yes.
just said something similar to things that I used to think. And did you ever think about this, or this, and let's talk about it? Right? I have
Right.
I try to have a very empathetic approach
Right.
to most white races, especially interpersonally, because I'm trying to persuade and move the needle. And as a white racist, of course, it's easier for me to have empathy for
Right.
my fellow white racists because I never chose to be a racist. I never
Right.
remember sitting down and going, you know what? I think I'm going to be a racist. Like I don't.
Yeah. Yeah.
Remember,
That's actually a huge misunderstanding that I see people make. They think that being a racist is a conscious decision that you're going to be mean-spirited, and they have no idea it deals with an unconscious racial bias. In fact, a lot of Black Americans, we have an unconscious racial bias against our own people, and we're Black. Now, obviously, it's much smaller in degree, but in many cases, it's still there. So
no,
I mean,
on
it's
that specific point, because I always will, like so many times, and unfortunately, from what I've witnessed, uh, a clear majority of the most prominent conservative Black thought leaders are deliberately shitting on Black people to sell books to white
yes,
people.
they are.
The not all. I hope I need to believe. But a white racist will point and say, well, how can that be racist if Larry Elder said the same thing? How can
Right.
that be racist if Candace Owens said the same thing? And first,
Right.
especially Candace Owens, I'm not sure that she meant that sincerely. Larry
I
Elder
don't think she has.
might arrive at his conclusion sincerely. I'm not exactly sure. But the point being that Black people who grew up in America are Americans. And
Yep.
and y'all absorbed the identical media images and everything else that white people did. And
Right.
so, yeah, you're right. There is a degree of anti-Black bias, even within
Yep.
some Black people. And again,
Mhm.
brainwashing is a powerful thing.
Yep. Yeah. And I think I can be, I don't want to say harsh in my criticism, because I think my criticism is spot on, but it may come across harsh. But I think Candace Owens, I even think to a certain extent, Justice Clarence Thomas, um, both have some degree of that self-hatred going on, not in the sense that they outright hate Black people and hate themselves because they have Black skin, but they sometimes, a Black person, depending on that Black person's makeup, will try to come across a certain way to get a as much, and they, I don't know, say stuff, do stuff, condone things, like for instance, um I can't remember, but there may have been a black bake sale, or what do they call those races, bake sales at schools. So we had one at UT Law. There was one at Michigan, I believe, and there wasn't one at Episcopal, I don't think. But no, that's right. There was a racist ghetto party at UT Law, and there were some black people that tried to defend it. I don't know the details of their offense because it happened so long ago, and the party had made national news. So the law school was dragged through the mud. And yeah, I expected a lot of white students anonymously to be mad with the black students for speaking up and whatnot. And that's good they remained anonymous because yeah, you might as well remain in hiding. So, because I'm the kind of person that will confront you. But there were a few black students who defended it. I don't know what grounds they had. But to me, and I could be wrong, but it's just informed speculation on my part. I sense a desire for them to meet the approval of their white peers, seek acceptance, and I think it's pretty prominent on a law school graduate type level because your schooling is and your connections are so intertwined with your employment prospects and people that a lot of people want to put on. I mean, part of the reason why I'm so vocal on social media and so outspoken is because I work for myself. I'm not going to fire myself for saying something crazy or angry, but I don't have to worry about, keeping my job or making my employer happy in that regards. I can just dish out the criticism as I see fit. So that's part of it. And, people like Candace Owens, my brother and I, we had this conversation the other day. We were talking about Candace Owens and a few other black people that criticized black social stances. And we were saying, if we if we wanted to make a lot of money and become famous as Fox News favorite guests, we could go to town on black people. Not because we're telling the truth, but because we know how to spin it to way it would be believable to a bunch of people who are willing to believe that. That's believable to those people because they don't know any better. They don't know any better. And what a lot of people miss is that y'all act like black people don't live in black communities and like we don't know the reality of our own situation, our own social plight. So when a Candace Owens gets up there and says this, that, and the other thing about black people, and we need to do this and we need to do that, it simply isn't true. And that's how I end up in discussions on Facebook with white people trying to tell me what the realities are in my own community, the black community. That's absurd.
Yeah, on Justice Thomas, he is a very fascinating psychological study. I'd love to hear your brother's opinion on him because, for example, he is he believes in segregation because he believes white racism is irredeemably woven into the fabric of America. And so that, for example, is not the comment of a self-loather or a foot shuffler or whatever. Like that's not, and yet his voting record sometimes it's like, you don't call it voting. What do you call it in the Supreme Court when they make it? Is it voting record or is it?
His ruling record, I guess.
His ruling record.
But I guess they do vote, though. I guess on those appellate courts, they usually have at least 3 judges on the panel, and they do vote on an issue. I'm not sure if that's the official name of what it's called or not.
But that's we talked about this on Facebook recently. Like to me, are you saying negative things about black people because you want to be a leader and see these things changed? Or are you saying negative things about black people to appease white racists and to make
Right.
excuses and to pretend as though racism is no longer a problem?
Right.
That, to me, that's an important distinction.
It is, and I sense some resentment of. I mean, I don't know Clarence Thomas personally, and I may have to argue before him one day, so I can't say too many bad things about him. But I sense some resentment towards black people, perhaps from his personal experiences growing up. The most mean-spirited statement I've ever heard him make was when he criticized the affirmative action program to Michigan Law School. This was probably right before I applied to Texas law. And he said that, so all of the briefs, I've made several comments about this, explaining how affirmative action in elite education works. And it is not as simple as black people getting a boost. People always argue merit, but they don't understand that the measures of academic merit are also flawed. And so they have to be assessed through a lens, a contextual lens. So if one person scores a 1550 on the SAT, and another student scores a 1450 on the SAT, but the student who scored a 1450 lives in a housing project, starves for most of the evenings. He's at home because there's no dinner for him to eat, and his mother works 2 or 3 jobs and can barely keep the lights on, and he still scores a 1450. That score merits a lot more worth or value than, say, the white kid who, say, lived in River Oaks, who had SAT tutors and who went to the best private school in the city, scoring 1550. And that's true because there have been psychological study after psychological study that have shown that kids who start off a little bit behind when they get admitted into these schools end up catching up to their peers. But I sense resentment that Clarence Thomas has.
Yeah, he's certainly a complicated case, and I'm the it bothers me when there's an automatic assumption attached to a black conservative that they're self-loathe or anything along those lines. I don't think that's fair for someone's race to be dragged into a political opinion. It's just that in my observations, it seems like it's. Are you familiar with the Hotep movement?
I've looked it up one time and I forgot what I found.
You could say this is a gross oversimplification, but you could say that they are the Christian version of the Nation of Islam.
Okay.
So what that means is you've got some problematic views that may be anti-Semitic, may be homophobic, transphobic. But the crux of what they're doing is they're saying, essentially, fuck white people. They're never, ever, ever going to fix the problem. We got to come together and figure out a way to fix it ourselves. Right. So they will, Hoteps and the nation will talk a lot about out of wedlock birth rate in the black community. And we'll talk a lot about of whatever stereotype or statistical trend may exist. And but what they don't do is use that to sort of explain away racism or be an appeaser toward racists. It's like if you go look at the, I'm going to read you a Malcolm X quote real quick with my $1 readers. because it's really illuminating to me as an example of what we're talking about here.
Okay.
He said,
Oh, is that the quote you quoted on Facebook the other day?
maybe.
And you hid who the author of the statement was until the very end?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So, all right. Okay. The first thing the black man has got to do is straighten out the evil conditions in the ghettos, not only materially, but morally and spiritually. We've got to get rid of drunkenness, drug addiction, prostitution, and all that. We don't want welfare programs. They create laziness. We need a program to educate ghetto people to a better sense of values. When ghetto living seems normal, you have no shame, no privacy. You don't realize you don't have these values when you've known nothing but ghetto moral conditions. Well, who am I to police Malcolm X's words?
Right.
I find that to be problematic because he didn't recognize in that particular quote that America made and kept black people poor on purpose, and that a lot of the statistical trends you could point to, it's poverty related, not race related. But that paragraph taken by itself out of context sounds a lot like something Candace Owens might say.
It does. The difference I would
yes. Go ahead.
The difference I would say, because I've had this discussion too, and it's actually one that has infuriated me. A lot of people will use black on black crime to support, the white racists will use black on black crime to bring up whatever point they want to make. And they'll say, they'll reiterate familiar or similar talking points in that vein. The thing is, in black communities, usually the church, local church, and the pastor of that church is the leader of that community when it comes to self-policing. And because words are imprecise, you can say something, you can say the exact same thing, but it can still hold two different meanings in two different contexts. And so what Malcolm has said there, okay, it's going to be more dated to the time period because we're not all living in ghettos these days, but I get what he's saying. A lot of black people have said that to our own for decades. It's kind of like, so we know racism is a thing, and we know racism oppresses black people. Well, as a kid, my mother and my grandmother imparted on me the value of being way better than any of my white peers, so that I had to be way better to get the same amount of credit. So my goal with everything I do is to be the best, whether it was when I played football or even more a bigger deal now, law. My ability to practice law dwarfs my ability to play football because I do it at such an elite high level, and there's nobody that's better than me in terms of being on a higher level than I am. So that message is, okay, that's what we need to do to overcome, because these problems are going to persist because societal conditions are not going to change for us. And these societal conditions were put in place by racism. So therefore, we have suffered injury. The white man is not going to lift us out of this grave. So we got to do it ourselves. So how do we do that? That's where that message is coming from, where Candace Owens and her kind where they twisted. And Bill Cosby said the similar things, but he took a lot of heat for it. And I agree with the heat he got, because I think Charles Barkley may have kind of said some of the similar things too at times. You're saying that message to the wrong audience. It's kind of like you coach basketball, so you know if there's a locker room issue, keep it within the locker room. Let us discuss the problem amongst ourselves, because if you blab on the problem outside the locker room, the problem ain't going to get fixed. And instead, it's going to get sensationalized and probably made worse. So it's one of those things where a black person can tell his own kind, or a Jewish person can tell another Jewish person, or a Mexican person can tell another Mexican person, you need to do this because that's not right, blah, blah, blah. And it'll have some cultural relevance or whatever. And that's fine, because the black person or the Jewish person, they're coming from an informed perspective. They have an informed perspective. So they're coming from an informed place. Where Candace Owens gets it twisted. For one, she's not even coming from an informed place. People assume she's informed because she's black, talking about a black issue. But if you're black, or you know of the black community, you're intimately intertwined with it, you know, she doesn't know what she's talking about in terms of the realities that we're facing. And then her logical conclusions are also flawed. And so she'll make it seem like, or what Bill Cosby did, make it seem like we're just making up excuses, or we're blaming something. But then she'll go a step further and say that racism isn't even a thing. It's just a figment of our imagination. And I always chuckle when I hear that, because I'm like, well, hell, one of my practice areas is civil rights and employment discrimination. How the hell is that a practice area in the courts, where I can make companies pay me all kinds of money if racism is a figment of our imagination? That means if these cases that were ever to get to a jury, surely a jury would render take-home nothing judgments all the time. But that's not the reality. And then there's a body of case law that has been defined, well-defined, and expended upon. That doesn't happen unless you have real issues that are brought before the courts. And real issues come from real situations, not fairy tales. So how do you explain the existence of all these things if these are just made up things? And that goes for everything, really.
Yeah, and that speaks, like you were saying a minute ago, that her audience, right, if she were really trying to make a difference, she'd be speaking to a black audience, but she's not. She's
right, exactly.
White audiences, reinforcing the racist things they already believe.
Right,
in order to sell books.
Yes.
And, you know, I don't know how we got sidetracked on Candace Owens. She's one of the, I unfollowed her on Twitter. I think I blocked her too, because she just made my blood pressure spike.
I can't even watch anything she says. I just can't.
You should if you want to see something highly amusing, since you don't like her much either, go find the clip of Joe Rogan talking about climate change with her. And he just totally.
I saw the beginning of that clip. I saw the beginning of that clip. And I saw the gotcha moment, and that was a great point. That was a great point. And she had nothing to say.
No. Well, she tried to, like, well, it's my belief in that. Well, no. These are facts.
Right. Your belief. Right.
And it was. I wish that. I wish she would. If you saw Killer Mike and T.I. kind of square off against Candace Owens and
I saw a few clips of that, but I didn't see the whole thing.
Big Mike was in his he chose to not take the gloves off.
Okay.
But then T.I. was not, like, T.I. was hitting her just with logic instead of facts.
Right.
Both. And Big Mike could have hit her with both and for whatever reason chose not to. I'm still not sure why. But I would love to see her, like, sit down across the table from. Do you follow Michael Harriot on Twitter?
No.
You definitely should. You would. I think he came up writing the. He now works for a larger black-owned media group, but I think he was one of the original founders of VerySmartBrothers.com. If you ever saw
Oh,
the letters back in the day. I think that was his. I think that's his journalistic background.
Okay. I know a few others, but
like
okay.
If he sat down across from her, which she would never do, she would never sit down across from him.
Right.
He would just absolutely obliterate her.
Right.
Logic and facts.
Right.
He did a thread on the whitewashing of Dr. King's legacy. That was a magnificent thread. There were, I'd never heard of Robert Smith. Had you? Are you familiar with that? The
Robert Smith? Mm-mm.
I'd heard of the Deacons of Defense out of Louisiana, but I had never heard of there was an NRA chapter in Monroe, North Carolina, founded by Robert Smith. And that was their mission, was a bunch of well-armed black men defending. They got into shootouts with the KKK if they might have.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. Well, of course, that's the history they don't want to teach us.
Right. Exactly.
We're going to hear about even on the revolts against slavery. I only remember learning about John Brown. I don't remember learning about Nat Turner or Denmark Vesey in school.
Right. Yeah. And who was the guy that stole the slave ship?
Samuels.
No. Never heard about that guy before.
William Smalls.
Right? Okay.
William Smalls, is that right?
I have no idea.
The fact there have been 150 bazillion movies.
Right.
About the landing of Normandy. How is there not a movie about, and that goes back as well to you want to talk about the conflicting absence of logic. It's it's incredible to me that white people attach both inferiority and superpowers to black people.
Yes.
How in the fuck does that work?
Right.
What is make up your mind already? It's y'all are very dumb and also very cunning.
Very cunning, very dangerous.
But that story, I want to say it was William Smalls, Robert Smalls. But I read about that story. I had a really good history professor in college that made it a point to teach us the untaught history. And so when I read that article or story sometime in the last several months, I had not thought about that gentleman since college.
Oh, okay.
I was at least actually taught about him. But I was never taught about Robert Smith. I was taught about Tulsa.
Right.
But not the dozens of other black people. It was like any time and again, the hypocrisy of white racism where we say, well, if you would just work hard and educate yourself and pull your pants up every time black people created
they burned it down.
Community, white people burned it down.
Mm-hmm.
And we still do that to this day. I'll give you an example. I mean, we're a little bit slicker about it, but so grassroots basketball.
Mm-hmm.
So for example, in football recruiting, it mostly goes through the high school coach.
Right.
High school coaches are still overwhelmingly white. If you look at the board of directors of the Texas High School Coaches Association, it is a white power structure.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And the same thing is true in the Texas Association of Basketball Coaches. It's a white dominant power structure. You look at the founders of it in the 80s, they were all white. You look at the presidents we've had, and it's been, easily 80% white.
Mm-hmm.
And the executive director is white, and we've never had a black executive director, and right on down the road. Well, in basketball, summer basketball, what we call grassroots basketball,
Mm-hmm.
started to take over a lot of the power from the high school coach on the topic of recruiting.
Okay.
So all of a sudden, the majority of the very best players in the nation were listening to their grassroots or club coach about
Okay.
what school to pick rather than the high school coach. Well,
Okay.
then some of these grassroots directors started running tournaments and camps and started to make money.
Okay.
And soon, grassroots basketball became an emerging black-dominated power structure. So
Okay.
the NCAA, which is white-dominated power structure, and USA Basketball, a white-dominated power structure, got together and put in a whole bunch of new rules and regulations and just roadblocks because
Wow.
they viewed grassroots basketball as a threat, right?
Okay.
So like, to coach grassroots basketball, you have to be a licensed coach. Through USA,
Yeah.
pay USA Basketball and have a license to coach.
Right.
You have to go through a criminal background check with the NCAA. You have to be formally cleared by the NCAA in order to be allowed to coach. And then to run an event, you have to pass all of these various hurdles, right? An event where college coaches can attend. And they're eager to strip your event of certification so that you can't make money. Because of course the tournament directors that have been around for years, since the 80s, most of them are white because banks wouldn't lend a black person money in the 80s, and still it's much harder than it should be. And so
Right.
even recently, but you look at like club soccer, grassroots soccer, that's a white dominated power structure. The NCAA and USA Soccer don't regulate them at all. Right? You look at volleyball, white dominant. Grassroots, NCAA and USA Volleyball is not policing them at all. Same thing with baseball. Yet in basketball, these grassroots coaches are viewed as a threat. They're viewed as very dangerous and scary.
Right.
And so existing white power structures, like what happened in Tulsa, will always try to step on the neck of an emerging black power structure.
Right.
Always.
Yeah.
And again, it's just important to understand that this, I don't mean for you to understand, I mean for the audience. I know you understand.
Right.
The audience to understand that this stuff still happens. Look at BLM. Yeah. The KKK still hasn't been designated a terrorist group. And Trump is moving to designate BLM a terrorist group. Why? It's an emerging black-dominated power structure.
Right.
And that's always going to be viewed as a threat by the existing white power structures. Existing white power structures are always going to do whatever they can to reduce the power of or to eliminate the organization completely, still to this day.
Yeah.
And I doubt you knew about that specific example, but you don't look surprised.
No, I'm not surprised. I can even in the legal arena, which it's even more covert. But if you, granted, look, I'm the first one to criticize any and every law school, especially ones that aren't ranked at the tippy top, because at some point, particularly your bottom half law schools have to struggle to meet bar accreditation and whatnot. But still, yet though, I mean, the fact of the matter is, you can have a complete idiot graduate from University of Texas School of Law. I have faced them in court. Idiots come out of every single law school, although I have not seen an idiot come out of Stanford Law School yet. So, but I've met Yale and Harvard Law School idiots too. The point being that schools that tend to, regardless of their selectivity, schools that tend to have a larger percentage of black students or students of color, they are stigmatized more so. Now, granted, what I mean by that is most of your school, well, all your schools that have ridiculous selectivity requirements, academic requirements, are all predominantly white. But I'm talking about at the bottom ranking. So you'll have South Texas School of Law, you'll have Thurgood Marshall's School of Law. That's the law school at Texas Southern University. There'll be, there's a whole bunch of law schools, and a lot of those law schools have a large. Some of those law schools have a significant percentage of students of color, whereas others of those law schools don't. But yet, the way it works out, like we're like State Bar of Texas is having this little fiasco right now because the president made a racist statement towards Black Lives Matter. He called it a terrorist group. I think that was some years ago, but he criticized a poll worker for wearing a Black Lives Matter T-shirt. I don't know the intricacies of the law or whatnot, but look, that vibe is it comes through loud and clear. As a black lawyer, I do not feel represented by or embraced by the Texas State Bar. I just don't. That's why I don't associate with any of those lawyers. The only lawyers I associate with are the black lawyers I know or lawyers I went to law school with at UT, regardless of the race, and maybe a few law school students that went to Michigan because that's where I went to school for undergrad. But outside of that, there are people that will have you believe that South Texas is a school that is light years beyond Thurgood Marshall. And the selectivity is not that different. It's just that South Texas does not have a significant number of students of color that go there, but Texas Southern does. And so there's not an orchestrated attempt to keep black lawyers down, like in the example you just explained, but there's still this stigmatizing that you get labeled with if you are a black lawyer that practices in Texas. I can't speak for other states. And it is even magnified that much more if you don't work at a premium law firm. So, like, because of that, I'm a black law school graduate and I have my own law firm. Well, that's a double whammy in terms of stigmatizing. You know, I'll go to UT Law happy hour, and there's some people that are just rubbed the wrong way when they find out I don't work at a big law firm like everybody, like most other UT Law graduates work at. And so there's this, and it's like, that's, I have chips on my shoulder for days. I'm like Tom Brady. So it's like, yeah, okay, I don't work at a big law firm, but I will whoop big law firms' ass because I've already done it for the last 10 years in court. So, watch you talking to. But yeah, so you have that. It's the effect is operated a little bit differently because it's not a concerted effort, orchestrated effort, planned out effort like what you just described, but it's there. It's there. You know,
Well, the
you have
ironic thing,
trying
Mark,
to knock our knees out from under us at every chance.
the ironic thing is, and sorry to cut you off, but
Oh, that's all right.
a lot of the stuff is not uh, cigar-filled back rooms with old white men plotting consciously to. I think it was very subconscious on the part of NCAA basketball and
Yeah,
NCAA basketball. I don't think they knew why they felt threatened.
right.
I just know that they,
I totally agree. I
and
totally agree. I think when I think that filters into law practice. I don't think partners. So at every level of law practice, whether it's big law firm or small law firm or government jobs, there's racism. There is a disproportionate amount of lawyers of color lower than what the pool of applicants presents. And I don't think there's a conscious effort that big law white partners are like, you know what, we hired his black ass, but I'll be damned if his ass makes partner at this firm. I'm with you, Joe. Let's not make it. No, I don't think there's a concerted effort. It's just,
In
you
most
know,
cases.
they just people get frozen out, and it's kind of like an involuntary thing. Now, with the Harris County DA's office, though, I don't know how it is now, but when I came out of law school, I would say that was intentional, a conscious discrimination, because I had made it to the final interview for hiring. I was about to get hired on because I thought I wanted to do criminal law when I first graduated law school. And it was just, they told me it would just be a formality. I would be hired. I just had to go through the final interview process where you interview with like 7 officers in one room or whatever. But I hadn't mailed in a picture yet, so they didn't know what I looked like. They just talked to me over the phone and through correspondence. So I sent that picture. As soon as they saw the picture, I was immediately cut from contention. They did not hire me. I didn't even get the final interview. They did not want me. And to back that up, at that time, the Harris County DA's office had about 230 assistant DAs in Houston now. And only 15 were black and only 16 were Latino. In Houston, Texas, Harris County, the most diverse county in Texas, and arguably the most diverse county in the United States of America. And Houston is the most diverse city in the United States of America. I don't know if it was back then, but we were close. But yeah, so you mean to tell me the DA's office is more selective than all of the grade A big premium law firms and other law firms out there? Getting a DA's job is like the least selective legal employment position you can get. Maybe working for CPS is lower, but it's down there, so it's not a hard job to get. And if you come from a school like UT and you want to work in a DA's office, you're a pink unicorn because they don't get lawyers from Texas because we have better employment options. I just applied because I really thought I wanted to do criminal law as a career.
Yeah, well, and you have the exceptions almost universally are people who intend to use lawyering to get into politics. So, like, if you're a Harvard Law School grad and you go be an assistant DA somewhere, it's probably because you have political ambitions,
right,
in the legal field. And I agree with you completely that in no way, shape, or form was I attempting to imply that there's no such thing as.
Oh no, I knew what you meant because I agree with you. I was just bringing up that situation because I felt it was so egregious that it was deserving of mention.
No, it's important to because you're right. Like I know you didn't mistake what I said, but we have an audience, and
I got you.
It's important for the audience to understand that I can believe that a lot of the racism we see today is at the subconscious level, without implying that conscious, deliberate racism no longer exists.
Right.
It does. And then my last question for you is, because I know we got to run. We've been on here for almost an hour and a half. So if you have time, and I should have asked this beforehand because I know that like case law precedent is like not something anybody keeps, all case law precedents in their head at all times. But if you don't mind walking us through a couple of examples where recent examples, I don't mean Dred Scott, but recent examples where the Supreme Court has eroded the rights of American citizens that wound up disproportionately negatively affecting black people.
Okay, so the Voting Rights Act of 1964, I believe, is one. I don't know the details of the act because I haven't had a case where I've had to study up on it. But basically, it protected the rights of black voters by preventing states from doing things, little underhanded tactics to oppress or make it harder for black people to vote or to register to vote. Because, back in the Jim Crow era, on the books, on paper, it was legal for blacks to vote. But if you were in the South and you tried to vote as a black person, you got beat up or you got killed, or all sorts of bad, or a lot of states had poll taxes, and they made them incredibly expensive, so no black person could afford to pay them, and they didn't make white people pay poll taxes, and so all those things were eventually struck down as unconstitutional. And then I don't know who pushed for the Voters' Right Act, but it was designed to protect state attempts at oppressing the black vote. And so a recent Supreme Court decision gutted a significant portion of the Voting Rights Act by I forgot what was specifically done. I can't remember if the court got rid of some sort of oversight committee or some sort of legal instrument that served to do oversight, but whatever it is, they got rid of that. And so now, instantly, almost instantaneously, you've seen these states close a lot of polling places, to where and not even indiscriminately. These polling places have been closed in heavily minority or black communities, just like with abortion. A lot of abortion clinics have been closed. Okay, so now a person, if they want an abortion, they have to, and they live over in this community, they have to drive like 300 miles to somewhere or something like that. But yeah, so they've done the same thing with the Voting Rights Act. So that's actually a case I think I may actually be litigating in eventually, before it's all said and done. Because one of the goals of my practice is to, I want to continue practicing all or most legal areas or many legal areas that present difficult legal issues or novel issues. But I also want to do my part because I feel it's my job. God has blessed me with this ability for a reason to fight for justice. And that includes fighting for people's civil rights. And I want to do that on a nationwide scale, not just in Houston or just in Texas. I'm trying to think of another issue. Well, oh,
Well, so while you're thinking, I want to color in a little bit of what you just said for the audience. So for example, uh, because of the Voting Rights Act being to a certain extent gutted, what you have is white power structures have sort of figured out how egregious they can be without getting struck down by federal courts. And
yes.
so you saw with the voter ID situation in Alabama, they passed the voter ID saying you have to have a picture ID in order to vote. Well, most people on the left said that they're trying to make it harder for black people to vote. Most people on the right said, also, black people can't make it to a driver's license office. You're the racist for thinking that black people can't do this basic thing that anyone else can. You're the racist. Well, we kind of knew the other shoe was going to drop. And sure enough, once Alabama got that law through, they promptly started shuttering driver's license offices. And not 100% in majority black counties, because it would have been struck down, but about 70%. So now they can say, oh, it had nothing to do with race. It was a budgetary issue.
Right.
And every time the Supreme Court weakens the stringent standards on this topic, you're going to have white racists in charge, normally GOP white racists, because black people vote Democrat overwhelmingly. And so it's in the racist political interests of white GOPers to try to systemically deny black people the right to vote, as we've been doing from literally day one, from the founding of our country. we've taken measures to prevent black people from voting. And so, yeah, we saw the ramifications of that decision almost right away.
Yes.
That with less oversight of that type of thing, it's easier than ever for a white person, for a white power structure to say, well, we really just threw darts at 70%, right? If it was 74%, it might have got struck down. So they've gotten
right,
slick
right,
of figuring like the maximum percent they can get to in terms of voter suppression without crossing that invisible line that causes federal courts to strike them down and make them start from scratch. So we really do we love to say this doesn't happen anymore, and that was a long time ago. But again, we're talking about like 2018 when Alabama started closing DPS offices in majority black counties. And the notion that it was strictly budgetary and had nothing to do whatsoever with the voter ID laws. Well, I promise you that if you look prior to the voter ID laws being passed, you're going to see that the budgetary issues in those counties were no better than they were after. So,
right.
I'm sure you saw that stuff in Alabama. It's like
it's been happening everywhere. It's really awful. I can't think of another example without getting too technical because it involves the Fifth Circuit. So the Fifth Circuit, because I do a lot of employment discrimination law, and so you have a standard that's been set by the U.S. Supreme Court, and it's old. It's old. The law hasn't really changed on these issues in a long time, but the Fifth Circuit though keeps on adding hurdles for plaintiff lawyers that we have to overcome when representing a black former employee who has been discriminated against. And so, these are technical things, so I won't get into it. But, for example, so when you sue, if you're alleging a pattern of discrimination, because usually workplace discrimination involves a long-term pattern of discrimination, not just one isolated incident. And obviously, as a lawyer, you're trying to bring the court's attention. You're trying to seek a remedy for as much wrongdoing as you can. So you're trying to get this, as big of a pattern as you can to present to the court. Well, the Fifth Circuit has ruled that if you include a particular incident in that chain, let's say you have a chain from the hiring to termination over the course of 3 years of just nonstop discrimination. So if you have some instances are going to be bigger, they're going to be more, they're going to shock the conscience more, and they're going to be the incidents that you play front and center at trial because they're just more tangible. The Fifth Circuit, not the Supreme Court, but in the Fifth Circuit, Mississippi, Louisiana, and Texas, if someone reported that incident to the employer, and if the employer addressed the issue, they don't even have to discipline other than make somebody apologize for it. But if they have addressed the issue, that is enough to break the chain of that activity. And the reason why that is significant is because the employment discrimination statute of limitation laws are very short. They're some of the shortest in the legal field. If you are fired from your job or from the date of discrimination, you have 180 days to file a charge with the EEOC, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. Once they do their investigation, then they give you 90 days to find you a lawyer to sue. But the main thing is that 180-day cutoff point. So as time moves forward, more and more stuff gets cut off, and you can't seek a remedy for that. And the problem is, you don't have to be fired from your job to experience employment discrimination. They can treat you like crap on your job. They can dock you pay, they can dock you hours, they can deny you promotions and whatnot. That's discrimination. But, if you got kids and you have to pay bills too, like everybody else, you may not want to. If you need to keep that job, you don't want to report on anyone, because if you do, you're going to be fearful of retaliation, which is against the law. But again, that's a hard claim to prove. And so because more than likely, if you report on somebody, you complain, you're likely going to get fired from your job. So you want to keep your job. Well, that's only 180 days, and that goes by quickly. So now all those events, they're beyond statute of limitation. You can't you can't seek a remedy for them.
So in layman's terms, so a hypothetical for you, okay? A black employee named John is treated overtly racistly by a supervisor.
Yes.
For years.
Yes.
Then, but then the supervisor intervenes.
Yes.
And you're saying at that point, the 180-day clock starts ticking.
Yes. Because see, without that, the courts have already held, the Supreme Court has already held that if there is a long-term pattern, it may have started 5 years ago, but if it persisted for that entire 5 years and then it culminated with your firing just yesterday, all of that is within the 180 days because of that continuing action. But what the Fifth Circuit has held is that if the supervisor addresses it, it cuts off that chain. So it kills that continuing bad action doctrine. And with employment, that's it's very unjust, because people need to keep their jobs, and you're only talking about a 6-month window. And then when you factor in, most clients they're not aware that there's a 6-month window. They're thinking maybe there's a year window, a 2-year window, whatever. And so they don't find a lawyer in time. And so you can still sue for employment discrimination, but like I had a recent case, all the really bad stuff that happened, it got severed because of the employee intervention, which they didn't even really do anything. They just called the guy in to the office, told him to say, "I'm sorry," and that was it. But that was enough to sever that incident from the rest of the ongoing incidents. And that incident, because it got severed, now was beyond the scope of the statute of limitations. So now we couldn't seek a remedy for that. And had we been able to seek a remedy for that, you're talking about, in my opinion, something that would have been at least $50,000 in compensatory damages alone.
Yeah, and I have no doubt that corporate attorneys instruct supervisors on that very topic. That if
yes.
you ever get a complaint,
that's right.
You establish a legal break.
Yep.
So that the clock starts running.
I'm in the office, say something that sounds good, and yeah.
Well, so let's do this, my friend. Let's intend on circling back in the next several months, and because I'd love to hear more on the like honestly, I would love to just start the interview by saying, Mark, what do you got? And just let you walk us through
That
some of
sounds good to me.
some of the most egregious Supreme Court decisions that eroded our rights in what wound up being in practice a very unneutral way, speaking of race. Because we see like throughout our history, we've got racially neutral language in our laws, but extremely racist implementation of our laws.
Yes.
Like
Yes.
separate but equal is a great example.
Right.
But it's not the only one. So,
Right.
well, I appreciate your time very much and willingness to share your thoughts and experiences and insights. And we'll make it a point to stay in touch. So, Marc Bozeman Law Firm, Houston, Texas. Thank you so much for your time.
You're very welcome. Appreciate it.
I'm going to stop recording.